What's the point of watching the movie if technically most of it doesn't even happen?
Hello, welcome to Jam Movie Reviews featuring yours truly. We got Jude, Ariel, Mercedes, and Michael. And that was really cringe. Yeah, alright, cool. Hi. So we chose Donnie Darko as our movie because we didn't want to be basic and choose The Matrix, which we feel like everyone else went. But in case you guys don't know, let me read you a little thing here about the movie. So it says during the presidential election of 1988, a teenager named Donnie Darko sleepwalks out of his house one night and sees a giant demonic looking rabbit named Frank, who tells him the world will end in 28 days. When Donnie returns home, he finds that a jet engine has crashed into his bedroom. Is Donnie living in a parallel universe? Is he suffering from mental illness? Or will the world really end? And this movie was made back in 2001. It features Jake Gyllenhaal, and it is a strange movie that really makes you think. And so, let me just kind of give you a little quick overview, spoilers ahead, of course. But, alright, so as this thing stated, the movie does start out with him going on a sleepwalking adventure, and he dodges death by, that whole jet engine that crashes into his room. And also in his sleepwalks, I mean, he's done things such as, flooding his school and burning down the house of a pedophile. But in his sleepwalks, he encounters someone named Frank, who is this demonic bunny looking thing. And they have several interactions throughout, and Frank seems to be predicting or like influencing Donnie's actions during his sleepwalks and that kind of thing. Donnie also sees a therapist in multiple scenes, and there are other, or honorable mentions. There are other significant characters, two of which have to do with time travel. They're what they call Grandma Death, as well as a science teacher who I don't believe has a name. Um, and yeah, so I guess the whole climax of the movie is when Frank, who turns out to be a real, teenager, he's at a Halloween party and he goes on a beer trip, and on that beer trip he runs over Donnie's girlfriend, and of course, in anger, Donnie proceeds to then just shoot Frank in the eye, and yeah, so Donnie's girlfriend is dead, and her name is Gretchen. And being that Donnie has this consistent fear of not wanting to be alone, which we'll get more into later, um, Donnie takes Gretchen's body back. I don't know, some weird thing happens. Time loops back, and Donnie, it goes back to that night where the jet engine crashed into his house, but this time Donnie is at his bedroom and he dies along with the crash. And then the movie pretty much ends. It's amazing, but it is a really good movie in terms of existentialism and the ideas. And so we wanted to kind of go through each of the tenets basically and kind of relate them to the movie. So we'll start with existence precedes essence, and yes, someone take over because I've been talking way too much.
Oh, well, I guess I'll take over. But the first tenet, obviously, as Michael clearly stated, existence precedes essence. And it is most evident, seen through the character Grandma Death, which is a character who just waits outside of her mailbox every day, checking for mail, living the same thing every day, and essentially doesn't have a choice over what she does, or she doesn't have any meaning in life. The actions that she does are just repetitive, and which is the existence precedes essence. Her real
Yes.
okay, the message distracted me a little bit. Um, but she wasn't always like this, and she did actually have meaning in the form of writing a book based on the philosophies of time travel, which Donnie ultimately hears about from one of his
The
teachers,
science teacher.
the science teacher, who he talks more about and has a greater interest in time travel because of one of the interactions he has with Frank in telling him that if he ever believes in it,
Right.
which makes us question the whereabouts of Frank, what his intentions and motives are, and yeah.
On the topic of Frank, you also have the tenet of responsibility. And as I kind of mentioned earlier, Frank is present in all of his sleepwalks. And he, Frank is like a growing presence, you know, with every interaction or every consecutive interaction. Frank gets closer and closer and becomes even like buddies with him as he appears in like a theater at one point, right? And they're just, you know, kind of chilling 2 seats apart or whatever. But yeah, so responsibility. In his sleepwalks, Frank pretty much kind of like guides him as to like what to do, but of course Donnie is really the one doing it. You know, um, like for example, he floods the school by using a hatchet to bust the main water pipe, and outside he writes, "They made me do it," which is, you know, I mean, really like begs the question, like, who really is responsible? Is it Frank the bunny in his dreams, or like kind of sleepwalk? I don't know how to explain it. It's very weird. There's so many like complications with this, and and it's interesting because Donnie is doing the actions himself, but you can't really blame that on, yes, so many layers.
And that brings us to our third tenet of ex-
Existentialism.
existen-
Existentialism.
existentialism, which is the concept of free will. And we see this idea disputed throughout the whole film. And lots of times it's really in like these small instances that you really don't pick up until you have like a second or third watching.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this one specific instance where Donnie and his friends, you know, they're like drinking in a field, shooting their gun, and they have like this very random conversation about the Smurfs. And maybe the first time you watch it, you're kind of like, what? Like, how does this tie in with the whole movie? What's the purpose? But after going back and watching the movie again, there's this idea about, well, they're the main focus of their conversation is Smurfette, and like it's a very vulgar conversation, so
To say the least.
I don't want to go into much detail, but basically about how Smurfette was created. You know, if you don't know who Smurfette is, she's like the only female Smurf, and she's surrounded by all like these guys, and she was created by the evil wizard called Gargamel. And so this idea of Smurfette being created for evil, yet if you watch the Smurfs, you know that she kind of like defies her destiny. So it involves this discussion of free will, because in the end Smurfette chose to be a good person. She chose to be a good Smurf.
Mm-hmm.
I know that may sound funny, but it really does tie into, like, as Michael said, this whole complex discussion about whether Donnie really has a say in his own future, in his path. There's also this whole idea of foreshadowing. We have lots of foreshadowing throughout the film. So we have the foreshadowing to the plane when Donnie and his friends, they're just standing on the road and you can hear the sound of the plane in the background.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't catch that like on your first view, but on your second, you would know that it probably foreshadows the plane crash with the engine falling. And then there's also a scene where Donnie is reading like a flashcard when having the discussions of fear versus love.
Mm-hmm.
And the flashcard basically says, it poses a scenario about a man finding a wallet on the street and like what's the correct approach to take to it. And that parallels to Donnie later finding John Cunningham, the pedophile's wallet on the street. And so there's like there's so many more. There's also like the small scene where we see like taking his pills, and like later out we find out that they're like placebo. So it's just all these small instances that makes you wonder, like with all this foreshadowing in the film, did Donnie ever really have a choice? Did he ever really have a say? Or was this just the way things were supposed to play out? Did he ever have free will? Or was fate acting upon him?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And again, like, you don't really notice all of these little bits of foreshadowing until the second time. And yes, we watched it the first time, and then we actually, in preparation for this little project movie review, we ended up skimming through the movie again, just kind of like taking little notes here and there. And it wasn't until we saw it a second time where we were like, whoa, they throw in so many clues and hints as to like what happens in the future. And it's like some of them are very indirect or direct. I mean, for example, like Frank, telling Donnie about certain things, but then a lot of the times it is kind of like in those small scenes, and just there's a lot of details, and if you pay attention to them, I think it'll make your viewing experience a lot better. But the fourth tenet here is anguish, and that whole concept is
Yeah.
basically like your responsibility can have some negative consequences, which will bring despair. Um, and in the movie, um, you know, what was it? Donnie's girlfriend Gretchen ends up dying, and we have this kind of like dilemma here with Donnie and with himself, because the whole reason she was even out there was because Donnie pretty much led him and his friends to what was it, the old lady's house, Grandma Death, and and not gonna lie, I kind of just blanked out here. Where am I going with this?
So, um, Grandma death. Yeah. So Donnie's girlfriend ended up being killed, and he feels the anguish of this. And like Michael talked about earlier, ends up taking out a gun, and shooting the murderer in the face, and just Donnie has to deal with all of this. And Lady Death, oh not Lady Death, my bad. The lady, actually early in the film, whispers a comment in Donnie's ear about every living creature dies alone, and I think that weighed on him a lot throughout the whole film. He he's mentioned a lot that he's afraid, and he's even mentioned he's afraid of being alone. So you can see like Frank as an accomplice, almost being his only friend in the sense that he's scared of being alone, but luckily Frank's always there for him. And I think he sees his girlfriend when she dies and sees that she's alone, and he doesn't want her to feel that, so he takes her with him. And he knows that he's going to end up dying soon, the countdown coming. And we can see him sitting in the forest with him and his dead girlfriend, and how he doesn't want her to be alone, but at the same time he's scared himself. It's the fear of dying alone. So he's there with countdown finally reaching 0 with him and his girlfriend, and just sees how he actually ends up dying later when the time all goes whoobada whoobada,
Yeah.
It's just the anguish you see in the whole movie about dying alone. And even though the body was there, he did end up dying alone if you think about it, because she was not there anymore physically, or not, or spiritually.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that was very interesting. And it was even foreshadowed that he was going to die earlier, because during the Halloween party, or Halloween, he was wearing a skeleton shirt, which,
Whoa.
was like he was going to die. Maybe even the Grim Reaper in some sense, because his girlfriend was going to die, unless he died himself, which is kind of a whole butterfly effect if you think about it. Without his death, she dies, but with his death, she won't die. So he kind of is the master of death in that sense, of the choice of him dying or his girlfriend. So I don't know, in some sense you can think about his death actually stops her death. I think it's kind of beautiful in the sense of Romeo and Juliet kind of style a little bit.
Yeah. Dang. I don't know, but that whole idea of like the fear of being alone does kind of tie into the last tenet of existentialism, which is forlornness. And I mean, in that movie, there are a lot of instances like they made me do it kind of thing, but in reality Donnie really can't shift the blame to anyone because he is the sole, like person responsible for his actions. And I mean, yeah, like it really demonstrates forlornness in a great sense and just in general. um
There's also this one specific conversation between Donnie and his science teacher where they're talking about time travel and like how realistic it would be. And basically, I think Donnie mentions that there probably is no God. And
yeah.
so that ties back into this idea of forlornness, which says that God doesn't exist. And so there's really no like moral figure or anybody to base off your actions. You can't blame anybody. You can't say
Mm.
that you did something because you were following God's will or because it was according to whatever God had said. The only person you can really blame is yourself, and that's true for Donnie.
Yeah.
And there, continuing that conversation, there was the science teacher. He has this whole spiel about how really that if fate were truly real, if we could see our fate, then we would have the choice to defy it. And so it ties all the tenets tie back into each other. And I think that's one of the things that makes this film so great about how cohesive it is, how the details just kind of like mold together in order to create this really thought-provoking product.
Exactly. So I think Donnie Darko does a great job of really demonstrating the tenets of existentialism. And I mean, maybe some of it is like a bit of a stretch, with because we were watching this movie with, like the purpose of finding
With
these.
the critical eye.
Yeah, but like even then, like as a movie itself, it really is such a thought-provoking one that really kind of makes me think about all these aspects, of like dying alone and, like relationships and just kind of like that whole idea of free will and like what are you like what you're responsible for and what you're not. It's a great film. Honestly, I would probably give it. I think after the first time I was left so confused.
Yeah, I think we all were.
Oh God.
Because
Yep.
Definitely.
and I think Mercedes mentioned this earlier, but I don't believe it was recorded. But she said that how it does make sense that this movie would be so confusing because existentialism itself is. I think it's fair to say that it's really confusing, and so there's just so many layers to how well how well Donnie Darko fits existentialism, and
Yeah, and honestly, our explanations probably don't do it justice. So I would definitely recommend that you guys go and watch the film for yourself, so you can kind of
Mm-hmm.
make your own interpretations, your own theories, and I think in general, you guys will just really enjoy it. I think it's fun if you want something to do on a weekend, if you want to try to, I don't know, expand your brain cells.
yeah, and it is free to watch like on YouTube.
Yeah.
I mean,
Ooh.
ads will pop up occasionally, but I mean that's really no bother. And yeah, and plus the movie does have a great kind of like cast. I mean, it has.
And soundtrack, definitely.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, it has Jake Gyllenhaal. It has his sister Maggie. It has Drew Barrymore. It has,
Patrick Swayze.
yes. Like a lot of like good actors.
Jerry Trader.
Ashley Tisdale.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, exactly. Like and yeah. So, out of 10, what would you guys give this movie?
Probably a 9.
I would give it a
I-
9 as well.
I'd probably
also-
just remove that one point just because how confused I was.
I was gonna say the same thing. Like I need to watch it multiple times to get the full or part of the gist, you know. So,
Yeah, but overall, I think it's a great film.
You know
mhm.
what? I'll give it a 10 because it confused me.
Whoa.
Wow.
Okay.
That'd be most films, wouldn't it, Ariel?
Damn. I would give it an 8 just because I personally thought that the transitions between a lot of the scenes were kind of like, well, what the heck, like just full blown
That is
transition, just like a complete 180 from like what it does, and I think that kind
But I
of
feel I feel like they were intentional.
Mm-hmm.
uh-huh.
Yeah.
No, I mean like I get that, but it did kind of like um oh, I mean, for me at least. Of course, everyone is able to form their own opinions, right? But
will.
I personally was left even more confused. And again, I feel like this is one of those movies where you really need to watch it a second time to kind of appreciate it even more, you know? And so that's why I'd kind of give it an 8 out of 10.
Yeah.
But with that being said, I think that concludes this movie review of Donnie Darko. Do we have any last remarks? Just I don't know. What do you guys think?
Well, this movie has a young Jake Gyllenhaal, and he's very pleasing to the eye. I enjoyed his character.
Oh,
So,
Nice.
if you're like me,
Okay.
if you enjoy that type of stuff, then I think you'll like this.
I mean, he is crazy in this movie. So
Yeah,
Teensy bit off his edge.
right.
he's a bit bonkers, but it works.
Makes you dig it even more.
stop.
Yes. Okay. So we'll stop. Thank you guys for listening to this podcast? Question mark. And maybe we'll come back with another movie review. I don't know. This was kind of fun.
Foreshadowing.
Perhaps so.
We didn't really plan an outro, so I guess bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you for watching or listening.
Yeah, seriously made it through all that.